Welcome to Inside the Americas. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi. Coming up in today's show, President Trump's administration announces its plans to scrap a scheme protecting undocumented migrants from deportation. Residents in the U.S. city of Houston assess the devastation caused by Hurricane Harvey, but for some, the storm will bring big gains. And amid growing tensions between Washington and Pyongyang over nuclear test explosions, we take a look back at 70 years of rocky relations. We begin in the US, where President Trump's administration has announced the scrapping of a program giving work permits and the chance to study to people brought to the US illegally as children. Our number of the week is 800,000. That's the number of people who benefited from the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that could now be exposed to deportation. Well, President Trump has meanwhile given Congress 6 months to come up with an alternative program to the DACA. This next report looks at one so-called dreamer who arrived in Florida aged just 10 years old. Elizabeth Walsh has this report.
26-year-old Tomas Pendola teaches chemistry at one of the best high schools in Florida, where he has lived since he was 10 years old. In 2001, his family fled the financial crisis in Argentina that forced half the population into poverty. He has grown up in the United States thanks to DACA, which has granted work permits and deportation relief to nearly 800,000 unauthorized immigrants who arrived in the country before the age of 16.
So for me, the way that DACA changed my life is that it allowed me to stay in the U.S. and give back to the U.S. as opposed to just get my degree and have to leave.
But Donald Trump has announced plans to end the program, leaving Congress with 6 months to find a legal replacement. Without the program, Tomas would be forced to abandon his hopes to pursue a degree in chemistry, as well as the opportunity to continue to teach. While he could return to Argentina, for others from countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, he points out that deportation could put their lives at risk.
And this is like how most undocumented immigrants feel, because I mean, only 800,000 of us have DACA, but there's 11 million of us who feel like they don't belong, like they're always scared.
Tomas feels American, but like others, he struggles with the legal insecurity.
And you grew up in a country where they're telling you that you don't belong here. I mean, you feel American. Everything that America stands for, you do as well. Freedom, liberty, opportunity. That's all that you want for yourself and for your family. And yet, people are telling you you don't belong here.
Lawmakers on both sides have joined the outcry from Silicon Valley executives like Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, and others from the financial sector and other industries who oppose the White House decision. For now, Tomas and thousands of others wait in limbo for Congress to act.
Still in the US, the country's fourth largest city, Houston, is trying to come to terms with the devastation left behind by the recent Hurricane Harvey. Dozens died in the flood sparked by the storm, which destroyed thousands of homes and much of the city's infrastructure. But while inhabitants assess the extent of the damage, for some, Harvey will bring some gains. Our correspondent sent us this report.
The receding floodwaters have shown tens of thousands of Texans what lies beneath. Rebuilding after Harvey is a daunting task for many victims of the deadly tropical storm. The disaster is also an opportunity, a business opportunity. Tornadoes and hurricanes bring out the claims adjusters who investigate the damage for the insurance companies.
So that metal's done. That has to be deducted so that we have the correct calculations for the adjuster, letting him know we've got 4 feet of drywall here that's painted and textured. The other 4 feet is covered with tile.
The amounts of money are mind-boggling for someone like Howard White. After fearing for his life during the floods, he is now afraid of not getting the compensation he thinks he deserves. His house is unrecognizable.
I've never had to deal with insurance companies on any level. And on this level, I'm just devastated. I don't even know where to begin.
Then there is the massive cleaning operation now underway in large parts of Texas. Businesses from all over the country have traveled to the affected area. They say they specialize in post-disaster work. They hire on the fly, they pay under the table, and try to make money quickly. The project manager for this company has no problem stating his goal. He wants to leave Texas with contracts worth $1 million. He says he has already amassed a dozen other local customers besides this car repair shop.
A ballpark figure, you're probably looking at $30,000 to $50,000, something like that, just for our part.
FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is distributing aid, but its role now is also to educate Harvey's victims about the scams they could suffer.
People are going to try to take our survivors' money. We don't ask for money for inspections. We don't do that. You got to be aware about contractors are going to try to take your money. As soon as there's a disaster, contractors, fraudulent contractors come in from all over the country.
Opportunism is rife in the fourth largest city in the country. This economic powerhouse is only just trying to get back on its feet.
Next, our photo of the week is an impressive satellite image of Hurricane Irma, the most powerful hurricane ever recorded over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, the Category 5 storm, packing winds of 295 kilometres per hour, has already made landfall on several Caribbean islands. Well, the US Hurricane Center, meanwhile, says Irma could reach Florida by the end of the week. Forecasters have warned of potentially catastrophic consequences. Brazil has formally charged ex-presidents Dilma Rousseff and Luis Inácio Lula da Silva with racketeering for plotting to skim funds from Petrobras, the state oil giant. Well, the news comes at an embarrassing time for Lula, who's waging to win the presidency again. Brazilian and French authorities, meanwhile, say they've uncovered an international corruption scheme aimed at buying votes in awarding the 2016 Olympics. It's the latest allegation to mar the legacy of the Rio Games, the first Olympics in South America. Amid increasing tensions on the Korean peninsula, the question being raised is exactly how far is North Korea prepared to go? Well, North Korea launched its sixth and largest nuclear test explosion last weekend, a move which led the US to accuse the rogue state of, quote, begging for war. Well, Clément Bonnereau reports on the tensions between the two countries dating back to the 1950s.
After World War II and as the Cold War began, the two global superpowers divided the Korean peninsula, previously occupied by Japan, along the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union occupied the north and the United States the south, creating two separate states. The Korean War began in 1950 when the North invaded the South, sparking a conflict that killed millions on both sides. A ceasefire was agreed in 1953, but no peace treaty was ever signed, meaning that technically North Korea, South Korea and their allies are still at war. Tensions flared up again in 1968 when Pyongyang captured the USS Pueblo, a US spy ship holding its crew captive for 11 months. Throughout the 1990s, however, both sides made efforts to normalize relations. Former US President Jimmy Carter visited Pyongyang in 1994, followed by then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright 5 years later. The two sides signed the so-called Agreed Framework, under which North Korea committed to freezing its nuclear program in exchange for heavy fuel oil. Implementation of the agreement, however, did not occur smoothly and came to an abrupt halt in the wake of the 9/11 attacks on US soil. In his 2002 State of the Union address, President George W. Bush labelled North Korea as part of an axis of evil, accusing it of violating the agreed framework.
Our second goal is to prevent regimes that sponsor terror from threatening America. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens.
In response, North Korea branded Bush as a tyrant worse than Hitler and a political imbecile. The country conducted its first nuclear test in 2006, followed by another one 3 years later. In an effort to soothe tensions, however, the US took North Korea off its list of state sponsors of terrorism in return for controls on Pyongyang's nuclear installations. But talks collapsed in 2010 after North Korea ordered international monitors to leave the country. Throughout his presidency, Barack Obama pursued a policy of strategic patience towards North Korea, trying to avoid war at all costs.
We are committed to the preservation of peace and stability in Northeast Asia and on the Korean peninsula.
Despite international sanctions, North Korea has been able to develop and expand its ballistic and nuclear programs, saying the entire US territory is now within range of its intercontinental ballistic missiles. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has threatened Pyongyang with fire and fury, sparking a war of words between the two countries.
And finally, the indigenous people on Chile's Easter Island have given the green light for the biggest marine protection zone in Latin America. Well, the go-ahead for the massive 720,000 square kilometres protection area comes following a vote by the island's native Rapa Nui inhabitants on Sunday. Well, there are a number of threats to the island's marine life, including the overexploitation of fisheries, an increasing number of visitors and climate change. Well, we leave you with these images. Thanks so much for watching this week's Inside the Americans. We'll see you again at the same time next week.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.